Incredible honor to be here with you all and to see Sal again. He was referencing a time that I think was very formative for him and his brothers out there, and it certainly was for me. I can easily say that my time in the Korangal was the high point of my career as a journalist. I did a lot of things I'm proud of. I was in Afghanistan starting in the mid-90s, covering the Civil War there, but as an experience that changed me, the Korangal was it. So much so that 10 years on now, with a family and a wonderful life at home, I keep wondering why I miss it. Not wondering why I miss it, I actually have figured that out, marveling at the fact that I miss it. There's an amazing film that you all should watch. I think it applies probably to just about everything you guys are doing. It's called The Best Years of Our Lives. It's about soldiers coming back from World War II. I thought, before I saw it, that it was an ironic title. Yeah, they took the best years of our lives from us. When you watch the film, it's black and white. You watch the film, you realize that they were being absolutely literal. And there's an amazing scene. I think there's four soldiers that are coming back. And back then, there was no cell phones, there was no Facebook, there was nothing. Guys would come back after 2 or 3 years fighting in Europe or in the Pacific. They would come back, they would arrive in town and walk up their street and in the front door of their home. I mean, that's how guys came back at times. It's about that kind of reentry into society. So these guys they land at some airfield and they all decide, okay, before we go, they get a taxi and they decide before we all go home, let's just have a drink, right? Surprise, surprise. So they go off to a bar. What happens? They immediately get into an altercation at the bar, right? So they get through with that. They get back in the taxi. They drop one guy off, and the next guy, they get close to his house and they pull to a stop, and he says, "Can we just go get another drink and then I'll go home?" And his buddy says to him, "Listen, your family hasn't seen you in 3 years. They're right in there, and that, you walk up those steps in the door, that's your family. They miss you. They don't even know you're in town. Like, you have to go home. It's time to go home." And he takes a deep breath and says, "I feel like I'm about to hit a beach." Meaning, I feel like I'm about to land under machine gun fire on some island in the Pacific to try to take it from the enemy. It's not that he didn't love his family. It's that the prospect of coming back can be at least as hard as the prospect of going over. And that's so weird. Until you examine it, it's so weird, it's so counterintuitive that I think it took civilians and soldiers and veterans alike a long time to try to figure it out. My wife was the youngest of 12. Her father fought in World War II. He was 55 when she was born. He was quite old when she was born. He fought in World War II. The whole deal, from North Africa to Sicily, south coast of France, all the way through, most of it on foot, all the way through as a lieutenant and a captain, all the way through into Austria. Imagine what he went through. And he came home absolutely altered, but very functional. Part of the reason was that he came back to Kenosha, Wisconsin, and all 6 of his brothers had all served as well, and they all lived within a few blocks of him. There was, as in Israel, it's a much smaller society, and the problems that are scaled down as a result, there was no military-civilian divide because so much of America was involved in this incredible effort to stop fascism from taking over Europe and the world. My father grew up in Europe. In those days, his father was Jewish. They had to flee. That's how he came to this country. And he never lost his accent. He grew up in Spain and in France. He never lost his accent. But he was always a pacifist and always deeply appreciative and indebted to this country for saving, in his words, saving the world. And I think we are still, in many different ways, still doing that. Every society has to do two things. It has to defend itself, and it has to unify itself. If you don't do those two things, you can't do all the other things that you have to do. You can't raise children, you can't educate people, you can't take care of the vulnerable. You have to do those two things. It's extremely hard to ask people to fight. It's even, not even just fight, it's even hard to ask them to go overseas for a year or 3 and then to bring them home. It's an incredibly difficult task. It's not that hard to train people to fight a war. It's very, very hard, and it always has been, to bring them back. And yet, if you don't manage to do that, that great task of reincorporation, if you don't manage to do that, your society will split. It will not remain unified. There will be nothing to fight for. The mental health of I believe, the mental health and welfare of a society's warriors is a reflection of the health of the society. If you lived in a traditional, organic, tribal society, that process, well known to be extremely difficult, would be aided and facilitated by all kinds of ceremonies and rituals. I studied anthropology in college, and I'm reaching here way, way back, but I believe it was the Navajo that when a raiding party returned back, when the raiding party went out to encounter the enemy, when they left their tribal territory, they stopped speaking Navajo and they started speaking war language, what they call war language. It was a different language. And then when they came back, they would walk backwards across this line, back into their home territory, where the society is, where the children are, where vulnerable people. You don't want warriors around vulnerable people. You don't want that mindset around the vulnerable, right? They would walk backwards across this line, and they would return to speaking Navajo. And it's so interesting because having been with soldiers quite a bit, instinctively, American soldiers do the same thing. I mean, I think you know what I'm talking about by war language, right? I mean, it's all squares and acronyms, and they definitely don't talk that way around their mother, right? Or most of them don't. There is an unconscious and very deeply wired instinct to protect the society from the person you have to be in order to protect the society. It's an amazing thing, and people do it unconsciously. In an organic society, that would be handled through ritual, through ceremony. Another ceremony called the gourd dance, which was very popular among the Plains tribes in the Southern Plains. But versions of this exist in basically every tribal society that conducts warfare, which is just about all of them. When the combatants return, they have a chance to sing and dance and recount and act out their heroics on the battlefield. They get to portray in whatever manner that they want what they did for their community. Now, in a society like this, most people knew each other. This was all a matter of family, right? It's some dozens, some hundreds of people. It's not a nation of 300 plus million. But that process of coming back and saying, I did this for you, this is what it cost me, this is what it did for me, I'm going to boast about this, I'm going to try to heal from that. Like when you do that publicly, you are allowing the community you fought for, you are allowing them to help take care of you. And you are asking them to participate morally in what you did. Warfare is ugly, it's disgusting. It's not for the soldiers, it's for the society. And it's very, very difficult psychologically for soldiers when this brutal thing has to happen and society pretends that it's not their affair. It absolutely is. As my friend Carl Marlantes, wonderful writer, Vietnam vet, is fond of saying, you know, the soldier just pulls the trigger. Every other aspect of war fighting belongs to the nation. When you engage the warrior with their community at that kind of level, it's incredibly healthy. The problem in a modern society is that we don't live in small communities where that kind of thing can happen naturally. So how do we do it? How do you conduct that kind of process on a scale that will help hundreds of thousands of soldiers, millions of soldiers, 300 plus million civilians? Like, how do you do it? I think there are ways. I'll get to that. But that to me is the problem. The human animal has evolved to survive. We're wired to survive, right? We're almost unkillable in some ways. I mean, we dominate the earth, and it's amazing because we don't run very fast. We don't have claws. We can't climb trees worth a damn. And yet we're nearly invincible. It's because we cohere. It's because we function in groups. That is the key to human survival. Our evolutionary past was filled with horror and hardship and danger and atrocity and everything else. And if trauma were incapacitating for years and decades or lifetimes to a majority of people that suffer trauma, the human race wouldn't exist. There'd be no one else. There would be no one functional enough to go hunting or to cultivate anything, right? So as an animal, as the human animal, we are wired to survive trauma. But think about this. Trauma usually is visited upon people who are in groups, because most people exist in groups. Soldiers fight in groups. Earthquakes happen to people in groups, etc. Trauma happens to people in groups. But in a modern society where you come home from your deployment or whatever, the recovery often happens in isolation, individually. Not so for my wife's father, fortunately. He got to recover in his neighborhood, most of the men of which had probably fought, and all of his brothers, right? What we're not wired to do is to go through something incredibly traumatic and painful and then recover on our own. The real challenge isn't recovering from the effects of trauma, and I've felt that too. I mean, I started covering wars in the 90s. The first time I was really traumatized was in Afghanistan in 2000. I was in the north with Massoud and Barakshan while he was fighting the Taliban. You know, back then they had MiGs, the Taliban had MiGs, they had tanks, they had everything, right? And they had Pakistan behind them. And we were in some extremely heavy situations, completely outgunned. I came home, and I didn't really recognize myself. I had a panic disorder. Like, I couldn't take the subway because I kept having panic attacks. I had a panic attack in a ski gondola. I mean, all of a sudden, I wasn't a person that I recognized. I had never heard of the term PTSD, right? I just thought at age 38 I was going crazy. I had no idea there weren't any ski gondolas or subways in Afghanistan. I had no idea that my panic attacks were connected to what had happened those months prior. And it went away. Eventually it went away. I was in the 80% of people that will eventually recover from trauma, as we're wired to do. But as I said, what is extremely hard to do is to adjust to the trauma of going from a close-knit group back to a modern society which devotes most of its energy, seems to devote most of its energy to allowing people to lead completely individual lives. And when I say individual lives, I include people who are in a family. I'm talking about people who are not part of a community. Families are great, they're amazing, but they don't take you all the way towards mental health. They don't buffer you completely from the assaults on our dignity that life will offer up the way community can. Our suburbs are laid out in ways where the houses are not oriented towards each other. There are not communal spaces much anymore. People drive to work 50 miles. How are you going to spend time within your community
You're spending half your day 50 miles away with other people that you're not going to spend that much time with because you have to go home at the end of the day. I mean, it's a nightmare. In human terms, it's a nightmare. It's also an amazing blessing that we have these choices and this kind of mobility. But there's a real human cost. Then you come home, every kid has their own bedroom. Every kid in their bedroom has their own iPhone. I mean, the isolation just in my lifetime is getting more and more extreme. I mean, I was born in 1962. The generation before me, most people, I think in the 40s, finally half of America had electricity. Most of the people I know that are my age or older grew up sleeping in bedrooms with their siblings. You know, we're wealthy enough to not have to do that. There's an upside and a downside. It makes trauma very hard to recover from. And as a result, since this symposium is focused on veterans and soldiers, I'll sort of restrict myself to that, but as a result, you don't even have to have been in combat to have trouble coming home. That's the crazy thing. I just got a message on Facebook from a supply clerk who said that, you know, until he read my book, Tribe, he said he couldn't figure out why. I mean, he never left his desk, right? And he could not figure out why, when he came home, he had a complete mental breakdown. He finally got it. He's like, oh, I miss being part of that group. Now I'm back with my family. Why do I love my family? What is it? How come I'm not happy? It's really puzzling, and it's puzzling to the person. It's puzzling to their spouse and their kids too. You finally get this person home, and and something's missing. Something's wrong. What's wrong is, the thing that's missing is a very, very healthy thing. Like, we need community. We're a social species. I talked to a cancer survivor once who said that she spent some months on a cancer ward, and she survived. She was one of the lucky ones. She survived. A lot of people that she knew on that ward didn't make it, and she did. And she looked at me really sadly, and she said, now I miss being sick. She missed the community of a cancer ward, right? A lot of the soldiers that I knew out of Restrepo missed. I mean, they were psyched to get back to Vicenza, don't get me wrong. But a lot of them, some months later, they said, boy, we don't want to go back to America, we want to go back to Restrepo. People will go through almost anything. They will suffer almost any hardship if they can stay in the group of people that they care about. So healing from trauma, healing from PTS or PTSD, however you choose to call it, must include an understanding of the role of community and the effect on all of us, not just veterans and soldiers, but all of us, for not having enough of it in this country. Restrepo was a small outpost in the Korengal Valley. 3 squads, I think, plus some A&A. There was no internet. There was no phone communications with the outside world. There was no electricity for the first 3 months. It was a very rough place, and there was a lot of combat. What it did was effectively reproduce our evolutionary past. I mean, anthropologists will tell you that humans, most of human history, we lived in groups of 30, 40, 50 people, basically a platoon-size element, in a harsh and challenging landscape, depending on each other, depending on one another for our survival. That's a platoon in combat. That's what that's the human species. That's most of our, humans diverged from chimpanzees. The last common ancestor of the chimpanzees 6 million years ago. And that size group typifies human groups since then, right? So when you put people in a group like that, their wiring is inclined towards like this very, very intense affiliation, and then they come home. They're coming home to a modern society which has incredible blessings, right? Transportation and television and medicine, just incredible things, right? I don't need to list them, we all know. So for all of these advantages, isn't it a little embarrassing to find out that many people really aren't that happy? We know that as affluence goes up in society, the suicide rate goes up. The depression rate goes up. They've even found that civilian trauma rates, PTSD among civilians, is much higher in developed countries than undeveloped countries. The richer the country, the higher the PTSD rate for a given incident that traumatizes people. My guess is that along with all the stresses of poverty, one thing you do get is community. If you are all drawing your water from the same well, metaphorically or literally, there is a social fabric that is very, very sustaining and really helps people in a crisis. So what happens when you collapse modern society? I mean, we're no different biologically from any tribal group, any human group in the world of the past tens of thousands of years. Same, physically the same, right? So what happens when you collapse modern society? Interestingly, people cohere immediately. I mean, it takes maybe hours, right? One of the sort of breathtaking things about catastrophes is that it almost, like, in a few minutes, in a few hours, it eliminates social class. I mean, if you were in the Blitz in London, social class, income disparity, the sort of blights of modern society, they're eliminated. So if you're in the Blitz in London and you're sleeping in the tube station, the person sleeping on the pavement next to you, it really doesn't matter if they have a lot or a little money in their bank account. You guys are both in a very tough situation and you need each other, right? So what happens to mental health in that situation? It gets very robust. So the British government was prepared for mass psychiatric casualties during the Blitz. I mean, the German Air Force was bombing London and other cities almost every night. Some 30,000 civilians were killed. I mean, we lost 3,000 people in 9/11, and this country is still regaining its feet in some ways from that trauma. 30,000 people over the course of 6 months. What happened? Admissions to psych wards went down during the Blitz and back up after the bombings stopped. I read a paper about, and this is in some ways quite provocative, I read a paper by an Irish psychologist who studied depression rates in Northern Ireland during the Troubles, 1969, 1970. A lot of riots, a lot of violence, a lot of murders, a lot of killings, a terrible time. And he found that the depression rates were the lowest in the districts, in the counties that had the most violence. And Derry was the only area that saw depression go up because there was absolutely, there were no troubles at all. And the theory was that these people saw their fellow countrymen suffering, but they themselves were not suffering, and there wasn't anything they could really do to help. And that created depression. Now think about a soldier coming back from their unit from deployment on 18-day leave, or with a wound coming back. Imagine how hard it is to think, wow, I'm fine. Those guys are still getting killed over there. I should be there. I mean, basically the same phenomenon that we're all familiar with here, the exact same thing happened among civilians in Ireland. When society mobilizes to confront a threat, people, there is a certain kind of stress there, but people, because they're working together, get a very deep sense of this is right. This feels right. This feels good. 9/11 in New York. I live in New York City. Terrible trauma to that city. The suicide rate went down after 9/11. I mean, I remember walking around, still smell the burning, asbestos or whatever. I mean, horrible smell for a while, and you'd see people just in a kind of daze. I mean, just for days, weeks later, you'd see a guy just standing in a street corner staring at his shoes, and you'd say, "Hey, man, are you all right?" I mean, we took care of each other. Didn't matter, black, white, rich, poor, did not matter at all in those days after 9/11. Are we nostalgic for that? Yes, of course we are. We all want to live in a society where, ironically, part of us wants to live in a society where we're all the same. I mean, and I don't mean identical, I mean we have the same level of honor and respect available to us. That's a utopia. And it's created briefly after catastrophes. The cost is enormous. And I'm not sure it's worth it, but it's interesting to note how people look back on those incidents. I researched an earthquake in Italy, in Avezzano. I'm going by memory. Something like 96% of the population was killed in under a minute. I mean, they were basically hit by a nuclear bomb, right? The survivors had to last for days till help got there. This was in 1916, 1917. And this guy who wrote about it said that I'm paraphrasing, but he said that the earthquake had produced what the law promises but cannot in fact deliver, which is the equality of all people. Because he said in the rubble, as they survived, it did not matter who was who, it just mattered whether you were willing to help or not. So the question is, how do we have it all? Another natural human tendency to want to have it all, right? There's a lot of evolutionary programming which goes into wanting to have it all. There's nothing wrong with trying. How do we get close community and not live in lean-tos, right? I mean, how do we have a nation of 320 million? Such a grand experiment, right? I mean, human history has never produced experiments like this before. This is all recent, where we try to organize a civil society among 320 million people, most of whom do not know each other, and yet we supposedly and hopefully will treat each other with a kind of tribal respect, even if we're in deep disagreement with each other, or even if we don't really like each other. I mean, that was one of the things out of Estrepo that my friend and Sal's friend Brendan O'Byrne said to me one day. We were on an ambush, which sounds exciting, but it's actually pretty boring, and we were sort of chatting under this tree, lying down, and he said, you know, it's amazing. He said, there's guys in the platoon that straight up hate each other, but we'd all die for each other. That's a lot to ask for people in the nation, but what we can ask for is a sort of minimum level of respect and dignity. But how do you do that at this scale? It's very, very hard. And I think one of the elephant in the room in some ways is the country's going through a tough time, right? I don't care if you're a Republican or Democrat, I care less. I think from any vantage point, this is a tricky passage, right? And I think it has people unsettled and scared, and as well we should be. But I think we can learn a lot from veterans. I mean, one of the things that buffers people from their psychological troubles is being useful, being needed. An official in London pointed out that there were, during Blitz, pointed out that there were what he called the chronic neurotics of peacetime. I think we all know a few of those people. The chronic neurotics of peacetime who are now driving ambulances through bombing waves. Like people want to be needed, and I think the great crisis for veterans, whether they were in a combat unit or not, doesn't matter. They were necessary. They were useful. They felt fully utilized, and then they come back, and it's not clear how necessary they are. You are absolutely necessary in a platoon. In a country of 320 million, all of us can be replaced and we'd be all right. That's tough. That's tough to come back to and to keep your equilibrium. So I think one of the things that veterans can do to maintain a sense of utility, of being needed, and I think one of the things that will help insulate this country against its own worst impulses is to understand this ethos that Brendan spoke about. Like, we may not like each other. In fact, we may not even be able to stand each other. We may be in absolute disagreement about virtually everything. But we are of the same unity. We stand together. That is something that we can learn from veterans. There's an amazing, and I think it will help veterans enormously to take on that role. There's a great group, I think a great group called With Honor. It's a PAC that will give money to veterans running for office of either party, even in the same race, right? They will fund the Democrat and the Republican who are vying against each other as long as you agree to a short list of basically ethical behaviors that you will adhere to, that you will treat the opposition with respect, that you will socialize with the opposition, that you will try to reach a meaningful agreement with them, that you will not disparage them, you will not run them down, you will not say that they shouldn't be part of this. And they will give money to people of either party. That's amazing. Like, that is America. And so that's where this sort of platoon ethic in combat can, basically, we needed you after 9/11. We need you even more now. Because you know what? Al-Qaeda cannot topple this country. They can topple some towers. They can kill some people. They actually cannot topple the democracy. Only we can do that. We have the key to that box, nobody else. And one of the things that veterans really can do is instruct us all by example in how to vehemently disagree while having each other's back. It's an amazing thing. There's a very moving painting by Winslow Homer called A Veteran in a New Field. It was painted right after the Civil War ended, right after Kennedy was assassinated. And it shows a Union soldier, but it doesn't matter which side. He was a Union soldier with his kit, his bag, his rucksack, and his musket piled up in a corner of the painting. And he has a scythe, and he's harvesting wheat. It's called A Veteran in New Fields. And, I mean, that should be the iconic painting that represents the veteran's task. Like, basically, well done on the war, we still need you. We need to get the wheat in. Like, we need to eat. Like, you're not done. You're not done with us, we're not done with you. This partnership continues. The people who are really incapacitated psychologically or physically, of course, we're not talking about those people, they have to be taken care of. But I think one of the really dangerous things that can happen is veterans who come back and are either told or they themselves decide, or there's a sort of weird collaboration between the two, that they're no longer functional. That they actually don't have something material, emotional, spiritual to contribute to the country, and that we need to take care of them. I think a lot of veterans need to be taken care of, but then there's a lot that actually, in the long run, I think they would be happier and live longer, healthier lives if they could be made functional as quickly as possible, asked to contribute to society. It's what we all want. It's what we all want to do and need to do. I got just a few more minutes here. A couple of things I want to mention. One way to have this sort of community experience where we hear the stories of our warriors. Of course, social media helps, but you know what? It's not the same thing as being in a room with someone. If it were, and I've heard people propose that, I'm really against social media, and I have a flip phone. I'm against the whole thing, right? I don't want to do it. And I've heard people, when I tell people that, they sort of get their dander up and try to tell me that social media is a form of community. And I said, no, it's a form of communication, for sure, and a very, very efficient one, right? Don't undersell that, it's amazing. But it's not a form of community. If it were the same thing as being with someone, we would never again have to go to a funeral or to a wedding in person, right? But we go because we need to experience what happens in that room, in that field, in that cemetery, whatever it is. So how do we tell stories in a way that's therapeutic and helpful? One idea that I had, which is modeled after the kinds of tribal ceremonies that I mentioned earlier in my talk, is called the Veterans Town Hall. So we don't live in tribal encampments of 300 people. We don't live like that anymore, for better or worse, we don't. But every community in this country has a town hall, a city hall, right? It's the civic center of all of the communities in this nation. And on Veterans Day, you want to have a parade? Great, have a parade in your town, that's fantastic. But the town hall is not being used because it's a holiday. And one thing that we've done is, I partnered with Seth Moulton, a congressman from Massachusetts, who's Iraq War vet, Marines, I believe, and saw a lot of combat. He came back pretty altered. So we partnered on this to have a Veterans Town Hall in the district that he represents in Massachusetts. And basically what you do is you unlock the town hall, you turn on the PA system, and any veteran of any war who served in any capacity has 10 minutes, gets 10 minutes to say what it was like for them. We had World War II, Vietnam, Gulf War I, of course, Iraq, Afghanistan. There were people who were, there was a Vietnam vet who was in a rage, and he let it out that he had to fight that war, that we fought that war. There were World War II, there was a centenarian World War II vet, where it was clear, like, it was still the proudest experience of his life, you know, serving at 19 or whatever he was. And then there were more recent conflicts. There was one woman, this was amazing, it was a pretty conservative community as well, I think. One woman stood up, older lady in her 70s, stood up and said, I served in Vietnam as a man, and then I came home and got a sex change. That really blew people's hair back. But that's America, right? We got it all. That's what's so beautiful about this country. And so what happens in a Veterans Town Hall is that you get to experience everything that's, like, you can't escape it. The anger, the pride, the sorrow, like all of it that war is, the community gets to experience it, and the veteran gets to unburden himself or herself of some of those experiences. It makes the war, it makes the country, this country, morally and emotionally own the war that we fought, right? And that's true, that you have to do that whether you were for the war or against it. I don't care what side of the fence you're on. You're still in this country. And if we undertook something that big and that consequential, that's serious, you have to be part of it. Or you're really not part of the country. And I think one of the problems in the sort of current malaise is that this country actually doesn't, you can actually be a citizen and not contribute anything. You're actually not asked to do anything. And I think one thing that would help a lot, veterans and the citizenry itself, is not the draft. I understand the logic behind the draft, but I'm not talking about the draft. I mean, in some ways the problem with the draft is it's limited to wartime. How do we create the possibility of serving the country without a gun, whatever age you are, whatever year you become 18 in, whether there's a war happening or not? How can we do that? And I think compulsory national service with a military option would be an amazing experience. You know, for young people, it would make psychologists know that the more you sacrifice for something, the more you value it. So what happens when you don't sacrifice anything for the country that you live in? It's pretty obvious. We're seeing the results right now. But also, we will mix, this country is, my father's an immigrant. He was a refugee from 2 wars. And I think most of the people I know, their families came to this country within, a few generations back, pretty recent. Like, national service would mix everybody up, put them all in the same pot and stir them up, black, white, immigrant, non-immigrant, whatever, everybody. Rich, poor, atheist, religious. And that's one of the amazing things about the military. The military has its problems as well, but one of the amazing things is that it really is an incredible experiment in democracy. I mean, everybody, you're in a platoon, and everybody's the same, right? Like, if you're good looking or not good looking, or rich or poor, or whatever, I don't care what you are. Like, you get judged for how you act with that group of people in the moment. That's an amazing opportunity. And I think national service would go a long way towards imparting some of the benefits of the military. But it would be accessible to everybody, and we wouldn't need a war. We wouldn't need a catastrophe or an earthquake to feel that sense of unity. We'd be growing it ourselves. It'd be amazing. And you know what? If we do that, America will be a much easier country for our veterans to come home to where they belong. Thank you very much. I do have time to take some questions. I love questions. If no one raises their hand, I'm going to start calling on people randomly. But it was a real pleasure to address you today. Thank you. So the question is about the veteran town halls and what did the civilian civilian experience look like? Yeah, participation. Yeah, right. Well, but the way this was pitched was if you support the troops. And as we know, people that don't support the war do support the troops. I mean, it's almost reflexive, and that's fine, whatever. But if you support the troops, on Veterans Day, you should show up for an hour. And, people drifted in and out. I mean, it went 3 hours, so a few people were there the whole time. I was, but people would come for an hour and then leave. There was no disruption at all. It was amazing, and people were really affected. I mean, it was, people were crying. People were laughing. I mean, you were having all the experiences all the emotions that people should have when they're encountering something as serious as war. The civilian aspect of it could not have been better. SebastianJunger.com, pretty easy to remember. Or to Seth Moulton's website.
In the back. Would you share a funny story from being overseas? My name is Pat Ross, I'm a team of disaster response. Thank you.
A funny story. There were a lot of funny stories. I don't know how appropriate they are. So basically, since I was a very anxious little kid, and I had a fear of spiders. I had arachnophobia, right? So if you are scared of spiders, you were really scared of spiders because spiders are absolutely terrifying, as we all know, right? So as I went through my life, I got, phobias diminished a little bit as you get older, as you mature. And by the time I got out to the Corrigal, I sort of had my arachnophobia under control. I remember at one point but then I realized I really didn't. At one point we were on another ambush, and we thought we were going to get hit, and we were in a very vulnerable position, and one of the soldiers, a guy named Anderson, said he found some little crevice in a rock. It was dark and cobwebby, and he was like, listen, get in there. Nothing's going to hit you in there. I am not getting in that crap. Sorry. I know where spiders live. I'm not getting. I'll take my chances out here with you guys.
So the problem out there was that along with the Taliban and the heat and everything else, there were these big spiders. And it was really a bit of a psychological challenge for me. Well, my advice to you, if you're ever embedded with American soldiers, or anywhere near them, anywhere, is do not tell them your phobias. Just don't do it, right? So I made the mistake of telling the guys that I was scared of spiders. And one night, I hear this weird sort of giggling. And you don't hear grown men giggle that much, right? And I hear the fragment of a sentence. I'm in the hooch, like these little plywood hooches that they made, and they're outside. It's a nice spring evening. I was like working on my notes, and I hear one of them say, "I know, we can use pipe cleaners." I was like, and there's something about it. I didn't get it at first, but after a while, pipe cleaners, they're sort of long and fuzzy, and hair furry, and I suddenly realized in this intuitive flash that they were making a tarantula. And that there was only one person that they were going to use it on, and it was me. So I got ready like we would if we thought we were going to get hit in the morning, which happens sometimes. There'd be icon chatter about we're going to hit them in the morning, and usually we weren't. I think they were just trying to mess up our sleep cycle. But basically you'd sleep in your clothes with your boots half placed on and whatever. So that was what I did. I was like, those guys are going to come in the middle of the night and throw a pipe cleaner tarantula on me. So I switched positions from the way I usually slept in my bunk. And I was fully clothed and I was basically ready for whatever happened. And just like the Taliban, they actually didn't do it that night because I think they knew I was suspicious and they hit me a few days later. So don't tell them your phobias. Thank you again. It was a real honor to speak to you.